Sure.
One of our visions, and this sort of, I think, touches on some of the business models and some of the strategy around what we're doing at Pelican Ag, is there's an emerging asset class, very early stage emerging asset class, particularly in Europe, and it's called natural capital. So there are various reasons why this is all going on. I'll give you an example. Large corporates have signed up in the UK and Europe to two regimes. One's called TNFD, Task Force for Nature Financial Disclosures, and CSRD, which is the equivalent in the EU. But this is the first time in the world where large companies are volunteering to disclose their exposure to biodiversity loss and habitat destruction. So this is, in a sense, an extension of climate policy, whereby governments around the world are recognizing, and this has all come through the COPs really over the last sort of 15 or so years, but there's a growing recognition that our economies need to shift away from what we've been doing towards a more nature-positive future. And that, in a sense, has started with disclosures around emissions and attempts to reduce emissions at various levels, Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3, which you can touch on if people want to. And now is entering the world of biodiversity. So where is the biodiversity loss occurring? How can we stop it or reduce it? How do we change our businesses to adapt to a changing climate? And how can we restore biodiversity? And that's where natural capital comes in. So large institutional investors are beginning to raise funds and write significant checks into a range of entrepreneurs and businesses and NGOs that are looking to rebuild habitats at scale around the world. And within that, regenerative farming is one of the key areas of deployment. So Chris and I are very much at the vanguard of where a lot of capital is going to be deployed into the farming community, but other land stewards, in order to rebuild the soil, rebuild habitats, plant trees, introduce these various repair watercourses, for example. But that's only going to happen in exchange for hard ecological data that improvements have taken place.
Right.
So the very same technologies that we think can be functional and helpful to the farming and the food community to establish what regenerative farming is from a sort of a continuous improvement perspective are the same layers of technology that institutional investors are going to require in order to make these exchanges of value. Money going to land stewards for nature-based solutions in exchange for proof that ecological impact has taken place.
Maybe this is quite a good segue into the institutional investor. They are the difference between meaningful funding and not. And this space that I suppose might have been considered fairly cottage a few years ago is now very much on the map. So we're an emerging fund manager, an emerging venture fund manager, raising 75 million, which is very small for those that don't know the space. And would have been incredibly rare for an institution to have got excited or even considered an emerging manager in a niche sector 10 years ago, 5 years ago. We're now being backed and in the process of being backed, i.e. very far through quite extensive due diligence with a range of investors whom have alighted within their climate thesis on soil building, nature restoration, regenerative farming, healthy food as a solution to the health crisis, the restoration of climate as the key area to focus on. Now, the options within this is they can get involved in a real asset fund that buys land to reforest or to farm regeneratively. And there are some great players around the world whom we know very well in America, in Australia, some of whom have raised as much as 750 million into their last products and might be working from almonds in California to prunes in Portugal. So it's asset investment, which is owning the land or some kind of lease relationship with landowner within these products, or it's getting into the private markets. Now, within the private markets, the UK has never been as sophisticated as America in terms of the amount of a portfolio, the percentage of a portfolio that would go into PE and venture. And what does go into the venture portfolio tends to be through the 5 large venture firms in the UK. So what we're seeing is these institutions realize that there simply aren't focused investors within the nature, food and farming restoration space that we can back. And if we want this ecosystem to develop, we've got to go early stage, because in 5 years' time, these Series A companies will be on potentially their Series C, or potentially IPOing. And the pre-seed companies will be at Series B. So we need to invest here for development of the sector, but also because there's a first mover advantage. So we're suddenly seeing super large British institutions where the needle of investing £5 million into a 75 million fund, even if it does incredibly well, is not significant enough to move their needle at all.
Yeah.
However, realize the importance of being involved in the space and wanting to develop it. So we're being looked at extraordinarily by the range of banks, wealth managers, pension funds, large corporates, and not just corporates within food and farming, but corporates who are perhaps one tier less related to the space.
Right. As investors into your fund.
Into the fund.
Right, which they would, yeah, because it does, from my experience, a lot of institutional investors they kind of shy away from really early stage stuff, especially pension funds, things like that. They'd want to wait till you're more established. But there does also seem to be massive funds out there available with the aim of, even through the bank or the UN, there's huge amount of green bonds being issued and things like that. And I mean, some of the numbers are like enormous, like in multi-billions. And so it seems like there is a desire to do something and funds being raised successfully for it. But I wonder how much is making it down to the early stage guys, like what you guys are focusing on.
That's crusade, literally.
That's
yeah. And it's it usually just explanation. And we've sat down with very large asset managers who are very much focused on real asset and explaining the need to at least put a percentage of their portfolio into this space. Once we've explained, the penny does to really drop, if it hasn't already. You know, we don't sound like we're patronizing these people. It feels like there will be more of an influx of institutional in extraordinary fashion into this particular sector because it needs to be driven into maturity. Sure. And that's for us. It also is a way of engaging these larger institutions because, you know, the story is so impressive at a venture level. You're restoring, a particular, whether you're, as ours, which is a platform, our last investment, the company we're looking at, which is a nutritional analysis platform that really does provide the raw data that leads back to regeneration.
Right.
It's a story very exciting for more institutional investors to begin to get on board with and sit with for a number of years and actually watch the whole space mature over the various different stages.